We're going to be looking at some arithmetic expressions formed with basic arithmetic operators. You might remember from math class that an expression is just a combination of operators and operands. And in this case, they're a combination of operators and operands that can be evaluated by the computer. If you've ever taken a math course, you're probably familiar with the idea of arithmetic expressions. An arithmetic expression is composed of numbers, which are the operands, and also basic mathematical operators. The basic math operators are plus sign, the dash, the asterisk, and the slash. You might have some intuition about what mathematical operation those four operators represent. For example, you probably guessed that the plus sign represents the summation or addition operator. We can create an expression that evaluates a series of numeric values, calculates their result, and then stores that result in a variable. In this particular example, we're telling the computer that we would like to add the values 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and then after we've calculated the sum, which turns out to be 45, we assign that value to the variable called sum. The computer knows how to perform all the common mathematical operators, things that you're used to using in math classes that you may have taken in your past, things like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Python uses the symbols that we already looked at. The plus sign is for the addition operator. The dash is for the subtraction operator. The asterisk does multiplication in Python, and the slash does division. The table in your notes summarizes those various operators just for quick reference. Let's look at some examples where you try to predict what will print out from Python. Suppose we have value number 1 and it's assigned the value 10, and we have a second variable called value 2 and it's assigned the value 5. Suppose that we calculate this arithmetic expression, value 1 minus value 2, and we store the answer as result. What do you think would print out for a result? Think about that, and then also think about the other examples on here. What would print if we stored value 1 plus value 2, value 1 divided by value 2, and value 1 times value 2? While you're thinking, I'm going to open Python so that we can test out the answers. Remember, if you're ever reading an example in a textbook or your class notes and you're not sure what it does, you can always type it into the Python editor to double check your intuition. So first I'm going to create my two variables by assigning the values 10 and 5 to those two variables. Now I want to type in my expression, value 1 minus value 2. I'm storing it in the variable result. Whenever we calculate that result, Python doesn't immediately tell us what the answer is. If we want to recall the value stored in result, we have to print it out. So Python tells us 5. That's because 10 minus 5 is 5. Let's try the next one. Result equals value 1 plus value 2. What did you guess would be the result? I gotta spell it right. It's 15, that's 10 plus 5. And notice that in my first example, I added spaces around the operator, and in my second example, I didn't. And Python really doesn't care whether you do or don't include those spaces. It can evaluate the expression either way. So it's just a personal preference. Let's look at the third example, value 1 divided by value 2. So it's 10 divided by 5. That's going to give us the answer 2.0. Whenever Python does a division operation, it always stores the result as a floating point or decimal number. Even though 10 divided by 5 gives us a whole number 2, it will always store the result as 2.0. Let's look at the last example, value 1 times value 2. That's 10 times 5. If you guessed the answer was 50, you are completely correct. I noticed that for all of those, we got a whole number answer because we were adding, subtracting, or multiplying whole numbers. It was only when we did the division operator that we got a floating point answer. Let's do an example where we have floating point values. Suppose we had like result equals 10.0 plus value 2. See how that's different. Notice that when we're adding a decimal value to a whole number, Python gives us a decimal value for the output, even if it's a whole number as the mathematical result. We'll definitely add that 0.0, and that's because one of the operands was a floating point value. If at least one of the addition, subtraction, or multiplication operands is a floating point, the answer is always a floating point. Let's try to guess what would happen if we executed this statement. Try to guess what would happen if we did result equals 100 minus 5 multiply 10. This one's a little bit harder. If you've taken a math class recently, you might realize that there's an order of operations that's defined for mathematical operations. And the order of operations specifies that we have to do the multiplication operation before the subtraction operation. And so in this case, we would have to multiply 5 times 10, that gives us 50, and then we're going to take 100 minus 50, the result's going to be 50. If you had guessed that the result was 950, that would be because you assumed that the operations should be performed from left to right. So you did 100 minus 5, that gives you 95, and then 95 times 10 is 950. Math operations just aren't defined to work that way. We always have to follow the standard order of operations. You might remember the order of operations from your high school or middle school math classes. And the reason that math requires the standard order of operations is so that every expression has a deterministic result. In other words, if sometimes we evaluated 100 minus 5 times 10 and got 950, and other times we evaluated it and got just plain 50, and both of those were possible answers, that would just cause a lot of problems in math. Math expressions like this always have one standard result. When my kids were in school, they learned to remember the order of operations using the acronym PEMDAS. Perhaps if you went to school in Virginia, you learned the same acronym that stands for parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. When I went to school, we remembered that as please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. 110 is in a course that focuses a lot on arithmetic, so we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about how to do the standard operations like addition, subtraction, and multiplication. But if you're a little bit rusty on your math skills and you forgot all about the order of operations, or you find that you have trouble with these basic math operations, it's important to do some examples and spend a little bit of time practicing applying the order of operations to math problems. Let's evaluate a couple more Python statements. Suppose that we create two variables, value 1 and assign it 10, and value 2 and assign it 5, and then we carried out these operations. 2 times value 2 plus value 1 divided by value 2. Remember, apply the order of operations. And then a second example, 2 times the quantity, value 2 plus value 1 divided by value 2. Guess what you think the answer is, and then we'll check it in Python. I'm going to create my two variables again. Value 1 is 10, and value 2 is 5. And now I want to create the expression 2 times value 2 plus value 1 divided by value 2. And again, the spacing in there doesn't matter at all. Then I want to print that out. So let's think about this. What operation should be applied first? So I would apply the multiplication first. Multiplication and division actually have equal precedence. So if you wanted to apply the division operator first, you would get the same result. But I'm going to do the multiplication first. 2 times value 2. Value 2 is 5. So 2 times 5 is 10. And then I want to add to that the result of taking value 1, that's 10, and dividing it by value 2, that's 5. So 10 divided by 5, that's 2.0. And now 2.0, I'm adding to that 10. So I'm going to get 12.0 as my answer. Sure enough, there it is. If you can do all of that in your head, that's fantastic. If you need to type it out or write it out on a piece of paper, that is completely fine too. I often write it like this, where I start with the whole expression, and then I say, what values do I need to fill in there? Well, value 2 is 5, and value 1 is 10, value 2 is 5. So now I've plugged in all the quantities. Then I think about the order of operations and realize I need to apply the 2 times 5 operation first. So it gives me the 10. And then I do the 10 divided by 5 because division has precedence over addition. And that's where I'm going to get the 2.0. And then finally, I'll add those together to get the 12.0. And it's completely fine on any assignment or exam or quiz if you write out all the steps. But let's do the second example. So we're doing result equals 2 times the quantity, value 2, plus value 1 divided by value 2. So in this case, using those same values, I would say 2 times value 2 plus value 1 divided by value 2. Now I would fill in my quantities for each of those. Value 2 is 5, value 1 is 10, and value 2 is 5. And then I need to apply the parentheses first because that comes first, and please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So I'm doing 5 plus 10, it's going to give me 15 divided by 5. And now I can do either operation first. I could either do the 2 times 15, or I could do the 15 divided by 5. It really doesn't matter because the multiplication and division have equal precedence. I'm going to do the 2 times 5 first. That gives me 30. And then 30 divided by 5, that gives me 6.0. And again, if I had chosen to do the division first, that's no problem. 15 divided by 5 is 3.0, and then 3.0 times 2 is 6.0. So same answer either way. And sure enough, if I test it out in Python, I get that same result. Now, some people get really confused about order of operations. It's just really hard for them to remember. If you're one of those people, don't worry. You can always force an expression to execute in the order that you want it to by including extra parentheses. I'm a big fan of parentheses, and I include them a lot in my expressions, even when they aren't absolutely required. So if you, for example, had trouble remembering that multiplication had precedence over subtraction, and you just wanted to make really sure that that multiplication operation applied first, then you can add in parentheses around that multiplication operation. That will guarantee that it's done before the subtraction. Similarly, if you want to force the 100 minus 5 to execute first and then only multiply by 10 afterwards, you can force that to happen by adding in those extra parentheses. So you can always make the expression do exactly what you want it to do. You can control it by the way that you build the arithmetic expression. Let's look at what would print out from these particular examples. So you might remember from the beginning, if we do the multiplication operator first, 5 times 10, we get 50, and then 100 minus 50 would give us 50 as the result. If we do the subtraction first, 100 minus 5, that gives us 95, and then multiplying that by 10 is going to give us 950.